listening to Redeemed, a podcast by Pastor Wes Gunther of the Cedar Hill Baptist Church in Dillsburg, Pennsylvania. Thank you for joining us today. Today we're in the book of Nehemiah, and I want to look at the story of Nehemiah. And very specifically, I want to look at the opposition Nehemiah was up against. There was a challenge that he had accepted to do something God wanted him to do, but it didn't come easy. There was opposition all along the way. And we want to look at how Nehemiah handled that opposition. As we're introduced to Nehemiah in the book of Nehemiah and in chapter 1, Nehemiah is working for the king of the empire. He's a Jewish person, and he's enslaved in a foreign empire. He is not with his people, not in his country. It looks like he's ascended to a good job, but it tells us in Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 1, he was in Shushan, the palace. And so much like we had seen with the stories of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, the stories of Esther, and now Nehemiah. These are people that were taken. Some of these were taken in captivity. Some of these were born into captivity. And as the opportunity arises, they have remained faithful to God in a foreign empire. And God's using them as he's going to restore the people to their land eventually. He's going to fulfill the promises that Jeremiah had preached about, that there was a time when they would go back. There would be it would not be the way it was. It was not going to be the way it was under King David, under Solomon, under the kings of Judah and Israel. They were not going to have that freedom. But they, for the most part, were going to be allowed back to their land. Most of these things were not fulfilled as far as their freedom and their independence until the 20th century. And so here's these Jewish people with a strong faith in God, standing firm for God in the midst of a wicked or godless empire. And so in the midst of that, Nehemiah is working for the king. He had gotten a good position. He was a reliable, faithful man. And he had heard about the destruction of Jerusalem, his home city, where his ancestors, where his family was from, and it broke his heart. And so as we're introduced to Nehemiah, he is given this news. It has caused him emotional pain, to the point that as he shows up for work before the king notices his countenance has changed. And the king says something I think is very important. It says the king said to him, "You've never before been sad in my presence." We see that beginning of chapter 2, verses 1, 2, and 3. You've never before been sad. Something is troubling you. What is wrong? I think that's first important character lesson we learn from Nehemiah, is he had always shown up to work, according to this, always shown up with a positive attitude, with a smile on his face, ready to do his work. And the one day he shows up and something's wrong, it's obvious to everyone, including the king of the most important empire, who stops the business of the empire to say to Nehemiah, wait, what's wrong? That is so important. Think of all the opportunities that we may have if we have that positive outlook, that positive response in life, showing up to work every day. Positive or negative? Are we the person that shows up to work every day and people go, uh-oh, it must be one of them days, avoid them? No, Nehemiah was a positive person. And when something was wrong, it was obvious to everyone, and it opened up the door of opportunity for Nehemiah to do a great work for God. The king asked Nehemiah what's wrong. Nehemiah explains the situation. How could I not be sad? I found out Jerusalem, the city of my ancestors, it's been burnt. It's been destroyed. The gates are burnt out. The walls are broken down. And the king says this, which I would think astounded Nehemiah. He's the cupbearer. The king says to him, okay, what do you want to do about it? And Nehemiah, it says very quickly, he prayed to the God of heaven and then gave the king an answer. He had a quick prayer as he said, what am I going to say, right? And he says, I want to go back and rebuild it. We have no evidence that Nehemiah has any experience at this, but he's going to orchestrate this great construction remodeling project, and God's going to open the doors for it. So the king asked him how long it's going to take. I don't know how Nehemiah knows, except for, of course, the divine intervention of the Holy Spirit giving him the words to say when he needed to say them. And so he sets a time. He tells the king what he needs. The king gives him permission. The king gives him letters of access to the lumber and the skilled construction people to do this job. Nehemiah gathers all this and heads to Jerusalem to do the work. When he gets there, his biggest opposition is not going to be the construction. We don't see that really being an issue. We see that as something that continues throughout the story. But his issue is not figuring out how to make things level, sound, strong. It's not pouring footers and building walls. His opposition is people, and there's a lot of it. And almost every chapter through Nehemiah, he encounters significant opposition. Chapter 2, verse number 10, tells us when Sanballat, the Horonite, Tobiah, the servant, the Ammonite, when they heard it, it grieved them exceedingly that there was come a man to seek the welfare of the children of Israel. The Sanballat and Tobiah, chapter 2, verse 10, were upset that here comes someone to start to work on the walls and the gates of Jerusalem. They were not happy that someone was doing the work of God. They were not happy that someone was taking this seriously. So we're going to see them often in this book as they bring opposition against it. Chapter 2, verse 19 tells us Sanballat, again, Tobiah, and Geshem, they've added to their number. Now there's 3 of them mentioned here. Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem. When they heard what they were going to do, they laughed us to scorn. They just mocked him. They laughed at him. It's ridiculous. Who do you think you are? Who do you think you are taking on this? They ridiculed them. They ridiculed Nehemiah. They ridiculed the people that were with him as they started to get to work. Chapter 4, verses 1, 2, and 3 says, when Sanballat heard we builded the wall, he was wroth, and he took indignation against them. By verse number 3, we see Tobiah. He said, even that which they build, if a fox go up, he shall break it down. He began to criticize them. They begin to accuse them of shoddy workmanship, of not doing a good job. They're angry, they're lashing out, and they're critical of them. Now, the theme is, and I should have said this already, the theme is that no matter the opposition, Nehemiah kept working. Nehemiah and his men kept working. Nehemiah and his men kept putting their faith in God. Chapter 2, verse 20 tells us that. They declared their strength was in God. They were not going to listen to the opposition. They were not going to be derailed by the opposition. They were not going to stop because of the opposition. They were going to keep working. And the theme of Nehemiah is he keeps building the wall. But it's under severe opposition. We see by verses number 7 and 8 in chapter 4 that these same men had stirred up enough opposition that there were those that were taking up arms against them. They were going to fight. They were going to fight to stop this. And if you know the story of Nehemiah, he keeps his men, he tells them to put a sword in one hand and a trowel in the other. But they're going to keep working. They don't stop. They're going to defend themselves. They're going to protect themselves if need be. But until someone attacks, keep your sword nearby, but let's keep working and get the job done. By chapter number 5, things take a different turn, and that is the people within the city, the Israelites that are there. There's been a problem of those with some means, ability, and power taking advantage of those that were less fortunate. And Nehemiah has to deal with this. There's been some opposition. There's been some infighting within the people, within the city. The Israelites. So not just opposition from the outside. Now there's opposition from inside. There's something he has to deal with. There's a problem. There's some anger. There's some infighting within the group that is in the city, those that are a remnant, that are trying to live in this broken down city. So Nehemiah has to deal with that. Chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. Chapter 6 says, it came to pass when Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem the Arabian and the rest of our enemies heard that I had builded the wall, that there was no breach left therein, though at the time I had not set up the doors of the gates, he said, that Sanballat and Geshem sent unto me, saying, come, let us meet together in some of the villages. So making fun didn't work. Laughing at them didn't work. Criticizing them didn't work. Threatening to fight against them, that hadn't worked. So they're like, all right, let's just sit down and talk. And Nehemiah says, no, I don't have time to talk. We'll talk after this is all done, but I'm not talking right now. There's a job to do. There's work to do. And he would not stop the job even to talk. They didn't want to talk. They wanted to stop the building of the wall. They wanted to stop this project from finishing. Right? So the deceit was now, all right, let's just sit down and talk about it. Nehemiah's like, no, I don't have anything to talk about. I have a job to do. So there was some attempted deceit. And it tells us in verse 3 and 4, Nehemiah and his men just kept working. But chapter 6, verses 5 and 7, it tells us that they were now bringing accusations against, that this whole thing was really just secretly a rebellion against the king who had authorized it. Once again, they started a rumor. They started a lie. They started a conspiracy against him. None of that was true. He had full authority from the king. He was under a timeline from the king. He had been given materials from the king. He was personal friends with the king. The king allowed him to be here and authorized him to be here. And now they're stirring up this rumor, this lie, that his whole thing's just a rebellion. They're trying to plant the seeds of that doubt and that opposition against him. Listen, over and over and over again, it tells us that Nehemiah had a job to do. And it wasn't easy. It was difficult. There was constant opposition from within, from without, ridicule, laughing, lies, fighting. All kinds of things came his way. But chapter 6, verse 16 says, and it came to pass when all of our enemies heard thereof, and all the heathen that were about us saw these things, that is, the wall was done, it was complete. They were much cast down in their own eyes, for they perceived that this work was wrought of our God. Not Nehemiah. Who got the glory? God got the glory. Nehemiah was given an opportunity. Nehemiah stuck to the job. God was glorified. That is the blueprint with which we should all be working towards. Thank you for listening to Redeemed. For more information, you can email us at pastorwesgunther@gmail.com. Thank you.